Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we get right to the heart of the matter. You're here to learn, and we're here to make that happen efficiently, engagingly.
Hmm.
Today, we're plunging into the world of the Big Circle Gang. Quite a story here. A criminal organization with surprising longevity, really, and a truly global footprint.
Exactly. Yeah, the material you've pulled together, it paints this fascinating picture. A Chinese triad, starting way back in the 1970s, still active now.
Still active.
Yeah, and with connections stretching, well, all over Hong Kong, Guangzhou, Malaysia, the US, Canada, Australia. It immediately makes you ask how? How does a group with these specific origins get so widespread and last so long?
Absolutely. And the sources, we've got articles detailing their history, their activities, their impact. They're basically our roadmap for this. Our mission, it's pretty straightforward. Pull out the most crucial, the most intriguing stuff about the Big Circle Gang, give you a clear, insightful understanding, without
Hmm.
getting bogged down in unnecessary details.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning, their origins.
Hmm.
And this is where things get, well, unexpected. It's not the typical story you might think of for a criminal group.
Not at all. What's really interesting here is how it connects to a huge moment in Chinese history, the Cultural Revolution.
Right.
The Big Circle Gang story actually begins in the late 1960s, inside Chinese prison camps.
Prison camps.
Yeah. And these weren't just, petty criminals. A lot of them were former members of Mao Zedong's Red Guards.
Red Guards. Okay, for anyone needing a quick refresher,
Oh.
this was like a paramilitary youth movement, right?
Mm.
Empowered by Mao during the Cultural Revolution,
Mm-hmm.
known for being, well, pretty intense, forceful in pushing Maoist ideology.
Right.
But then things shifted for them, didn't they? Dramatically.
Well, precisely. Around 1968, Mao, for his own political reasons, basically flipped the script on the Red Guards.
Wow.
Many of these guys who were, acting on his orders just before were suddenly arrested, sent for re-education, often in prison camps, especially around Guangzhou.
So this sudden reversal,
Mm-hmm.
it must have led to just massive disillusionment, a kind of deep cynicism.
Exactly. I mean, can you imagine that whiplash? Going from the vanguard of the revolution to suddenly being an enemy of the state, imprisoned by the leader you followed?
It's hard to fathom. And it feels almost inevitable that this bitterness, this amorality would take root.
Mm-hmm.
And the sources connect this directly, right, to the gang forming. There's that quote.
Yeah, the one that says, the general amorality and cynicism of the Big Circle boys relates to their disillusionment with communism. It nails it.
That feels fundamental. So this wasn't just some random group getting together. Their origins are tangled up with this huge political, social upheaval.
Deeply. And it was inside these prison camps where apparently they used red circles on maps to mark different areas around Guangzhou that the gang started to form, inmates competing for resources, that kind of thing.
Ah, so the red circle on the map, Dai Huen in Cantonese, that became their name, Big Circle Gang.
That's the story, yeah. Dai Huen, Big Circle.
So these former Red Guards, now hardened, cynical, they start organizing inside prison. And when they eventually got out, or maybe escaped, between 69 and 75, many headed for Hong Kong, which was British then.
Right. And they didn't exactly settle down quietly.
Obviously not.
No, they basically took that paramilitary training, the violence they'd experienced, and pointed it towards crime.
Okay.
Their first big moves in Hong Kong were marked by really well-planned raids using guns, which was pretty unusual for robberies there at the time, and just a reputation for extreme violence.
So what were they hitting?
Jewelry stores, payroll offices, casinos, big scores. The Royal Hong Kong Police even gave them a nickname, Dai Huen Jai, Big Circle Boys.
Big Circle Boys. Okay. So from revolutionary idealists, betrayed, imprisoned, to violent armed robbers in Hong Kong. That's quite a
A
path.
stark transition, yeah.
But they didn't just stay in Hong Kong, did they? The 80s saw them branching out.
Correct. Their operations started spreading, first to places like the Netherlands, Great Britain, but really significantly for this story, they expanded into Canada, Vancouver and Toronto specifically.
Canada. And they weren't just, another triad setting up shop there. The sources seem to emphasize something unique about them in the Canadian context.
That's a key point. They were the first triad operating in Canada whose origins were in mainland China.
Yeah.
The triads already there mostly trace back to Hong Kong or Taiwan, so the Big Circle Gang brought something different.
Right. And maybe for listeners less familiar,
Yeah.
can you quickly sketch out what makes a traditional Chinese triad? well, traditional?
Sure. Generally, traditional triads are known for pretty complex hierarchies, sometimes elaborate initiation ceremonies, secret rituals, codes of conduct, loyalty, often with long histories, cultural baggage, you could say.
Okay, that helps. So the Big Circle Gang coming from the mainland was the first of its kind in Canada. How did they actually get established there? Did they just walk in?
Well, not exactly. Some members definitely entered Canada illegally, likely because of existing criminal records, but others managed to get in legally. They claimed refugee status.
Refugee status. Interesting.
Yeah, and by the late 1980s, they had a real presence and, frankly, a pretty fearsome reputation in the Chinatowns of Vancouver and Toronto.
And what were they doing initially in Canada? Same kind of stuff as Hong Kong?
Pretty much mirrored their early days, yeah. Armed robberies of businesses, terrifying home invasions, and also kidnapping wealthy Chinese Canadians for ransom.
Kidnapping for ransom.
Wow.
That's brutal. Really shows that willingness to use extreme violence wasn't just an early phase.
No, it seemed core to their approach then.
Now, thinking about those traditional triads you mentioned with their hierarchies and rituals, d- did the Big Circle Gang operate like that? Was there a clear boss, strict rules?
That's a crucial question about their structure, and the sources suggest actually a different model. Yeah, while they used some triad symbols, like that red circle, a Canadian criminologist, Stephen Schneider, he pointed out they were largely, and I'm quoting here, devoid of the structure, initiation ceremony, formal membership, or rituals that characterize the traditional triads.
So, less rigid, more like a network,
Exactly. Think of it more like a brand, as one source puts it.
a brand.
Yeah, like numerous smaller, sort of independent cells or gangs, maybe 10 to 30 people each operating across the globe, all connected by this big circle brand and, importantly, a really strong informal international network.
That makes sense. A looser structure might actually make them harder to pin down, maybe more resilient. No single head to cut off, so to speak.
That seems to be the case. Their strength really lay in these connections, letting them coordinate across borders. Members in China, the US, Canada, the UK, you name it.
Okay, so that network explains the global reach. And just as their structure was maybe less traditional, their criminal activities also evolved, right? Moved beyond just robberies.
Oh, absolutely. By the early 90s, they really shifted gears, moved away from the high-risk robberies as the main thing,
Of course, what?
a much wider range of stuff. More insidious things like prostitution, human trafficking, but also drug smuggling, loan sharking, sophisticated credit card fraud, and counterfeiting.
Counterfeiting, like money.
Money, yes, but also intellectual property. Things like software, films. They apparently dominated digital piracy in Canada for a while. Basically anything profitable.
Software and film piracy.
Yeah.
It sounds almost tame compared to human trafficking, but it shows adaptability, I guess. A willingness to exploit any market.
It does. And there's this really insightful perspective from a Vancouver police sergeant, Jim Fisher, back in '98. He called the Big Circle Boys a sophisticated gang, said they operated very much like businessmen.
Like business, how so?
Well, he meant they were strategic, learned from mistakes. He even told this anecdote about arresting one member who was like meticulously studying his own trial transcript for a credit card fraud conviction.
Studying the transcript.
Yeah. Trying to figure out the legal process, how he got caught, how to avoid it next time. It shows they weren't just thugs. They were thinking, analyzing, refining their methods.
That's actually quite chilling. It moves beyond simple crime into strategic operations.
Uh-huh.
Let's dig into that international reach more, especially with things like drug smuggling. That seems like a huge part of the story later on.
Definitely. If you look at transnational organized crime, the Big Circle Gang became a major player in the heroin trade.
How did that work? Where was it coming from?
They used their connections in Asia, particularly tapping into the heroin coming out of the Golden Triangle.
Ah, the Golden Triangle. Burma, Thailand, Laos.
Historically huge for opium.
Exactly. They were involved in trafficking that heroin into Canada, the U.S., and Europe.
Were they selling it directly on the street?
Not usually, according to the sources. They operated more at a wholesale level, selling large quantities to other street gangs who then took on the risk of local distribution.
So acting as major suppliers, middlemen in a way. Precisely. It highlights their position higher up the criminal food chain. There was a big arrest back in 1988. A guy named Kan Yu Luang.
What happened then?
He was caught smuggling a massive amount, like 97 kilos of heroin in one go, and was alleged to have moved over 450 kilos total.
Wow.
And the details around that case, mentions of couriers being murdered or refusing to talk, It just underscores how dangerous these operations were.
Yeah, absolutely. And beyond drugs, they were also into human smuggling, right? That's another really grim side to their activities.
Yes. In the early 90s, authorities hook up a big human smuggling ring run by the Big Circle Gang in Vancouver.
What were they doing?
They were actually manufacturing counterfeit Canadian passports inside Canada and charging a fortune, something like $20,000 Canadian per passport, to bring people illegally from China.
$20,000. And who are these people coming over? Was it just about finding a better life?
Well, that's another disturbing detail. The sources suggest many of these individuals already had criminal records back in China. Yeah, and they were specifically seeking out Canada's justice system because, well, generally the penalties are less severe than in China. Especially considering China has the death penalty for offenses that wouldn't carry it in Canada.
So they were essentially choosing Canada because it was perceived as safer
Yeah.
if they got caught for future crimes.
It seems like a chillingly practical calculation exploiting the differences between legal systems.
Man, that really shows how interconnected these things are. Crime, law, international borders.
Ah.
Okay, the story then takes another turn with this figure, Say Chilop, rising up in the Toronto branch in the early 90s. He sounds like a major player.
He really does. Say Chilop is alleged to have built some serious alliances. We're talking links with the Montreal Mafia under Vito Rizzuto at the time.
The Rizzutos, wow.
Yeah, and the Colombian Cali cartel, and even the Italian Ndrangheta.
Okay, so connecting Chinese organized crime with major Italian, South American groups, that's global networking on a whole other level.
If those allegations are true, it would have massively boosted their capacity, especially for trafficking huge amounts of heroin and cocaine across continents.
It really paints a picture of this interconnected global underworld. And even with all this international activity, did they maintain their roots or connections back in China, in Guangdong and Guangzhou?
Absolutely. The sources mention the Triad still thrives among the unregulated factories and underground banks of Guangdong, and especially in the city of Guangzhou.
So their home base remained important. A hub for operations, maybe recruitment, finance.
It seems likely, yeah. Especially given all the economic activity, both legitimate and illicit, in that region. It suggests that original base is still crucial.
And their drug influence, it didn't fade away.
Mm.
Some sources, informants I guess, suggest they control a huge chunk of the heroin and fentanyl trade in North America now.
That's the claim, yeah. Confidential informants suggest they handle a significant portion of heroin and fentanyl distribution in the U.S. and Canada. Now, you always have to be cautious with info from informants.
Sure.
But it points to their continued relevance and potentially a terrifying scale of operation in a really destructive market.
Which leads us towards more recent events, doesn't it? And this idea of an even bigger entity emerging.
Exactly. The arrest in the Netherlands, just back in 2021, of Say Chilop.
Right. That felt huge.
It was. Because it wasn't just about arresting a major big circle figure. He's alleged to have become the leader of this massive, overarching drug trafficking syndicate known as The Company, or sometimes Sam Gore.
The Company, Sam Gore. So potentially bigger than just the Big Circle Gang itself.
That's the implication. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime put out an estimate for the syndicate's turnover in 2018. Get this. Somewhere between $8 and $18 billion annually.
8 to 18 billion.
With a B.
Billion with a B. It suggests that the Big Circle Gang, or at least key figures who came up through it, like Say Chilop, might have been central in building a truly global drug empire on an almost unimaginable scale. That journey from disillusioned kids in prison camps
Yeah.
to potentially heading an $18 billion international syndicate, it's staggering
Yeah.
and deeply unsettling.
It really is. So if we sort of wrap up this deep dive, we've seen this incredibly unlikely origin story born from political chaos.
Right.
Their amazing, or maybe terrifying, adaptability evolving from street robberies to complex global trafficking, their massive international reach, and their continued, maybe transformed, undeniable importance in global organized crime today.
And it really makes you think, doesn't it, about how those specific unconventional beginnings, the betrayal, the cynicism might have shaped everything that came after. Their methods, their ruthlessness, maybe even their resilience. It's not the standard gangster origin story at all.
Not even close. There's that layer of history of political disillusionment that seems baked into their DNA in a way you don't often see. It wasn't just about money, though clearly that became paramount.
Yeah. And it leaves us with a final thought, maybe, for our listeners. Given this history, given the alleged scale, especially with the company, what are the ripple effects the unseen impacts of the big circle gang and whatever it's become on our economies, our societies, things that go way beyond the drug busts and arrests we see in the news.
Exactly. It pushes us to think about the sheer complexity, the hidden networks, and the profound, lasting consequences of transnational organized crime in the world today.